Hello, everyone. Good morning, afternoon, and evening to all those that are joining the webinar. This is a webinar on alternative financing for climate and environmental action in humanitarian contexts. My name is Natasha Westheimer, and I'm joined by Nishani Jaimaha. We're the co-coordinators of the Secretariat for the Climate and Environment Charter for Humanitarian Organizations. And we're also very grateful. You can hear me?
Yes, now we can hear
you are
you.
muted.
Okay. Did you hear anything at the beginning?
Yes, we
No.
did. Until you said we're joined by, and then.
Great. Okay. We are also grateful and honored to be joined by and co-convening this webinar with the European Commission for Humanitarian Aid. Carolina Wilberg from DG ECHO will be facilitating part of our discussion today. So thank you for that. Before I continue with introductions, I would like to share some technical and housekeeping details so you're ready to follow the event. The webinar will be in English, but we do have live translated captions. To see these, you can select closed captions or CC on Zoom's menu bar to choose your preferred caption language. And on this, just a kind reminder that English may not be our first language for all participants. So we ask all our speakers to speak as slow and clear as you can. And we'll be recording the event and uploading it on the Charter event page. So please feel free to share this along with colleagues and partners. We'll have Q&A time for all the participants. So please do share your questions in the chat box and we'll come back to them. And we also invite you to introduce yourself on the chat to those on the call. So today's webinar builds directly on the momentum from the European Humanitarian Forum earlier this year, where DG ECHO and the Charter Secretariat co-organized a session on the economics of environmental and climate action in the face of humanitarian impacts of climate change. There we heard a strong and shared message from both donors and signatories that if we are to continue advancing climate and environmental action in today's context amid the humanitarian funding crisis, the reset, the dynamic landscape, we must look beyond traditional public donor mechanisms. Humanitarian organizations are already facing rising needs, shrinking budgets, while facing growing climate impacts. This commitment to reduce environmental harm and strengthen resilience and act on the crisis has not diminished. It's just become more urgent. And many signatories are asking, how can we sustain this work? What does alternative finance actually look like in practice? And today's session aims to begin answering those questions. We'll explore alternative and innovative funding models that can support climate and environmental action in humanitarian settings, including in conflict-affected areas. And the hope is to hear some practical guidance on how these financing mechanisms work, what partners such as private sector or philanthropic actors are looking for, and how organizations can identify relevant entry points. And we'll also showcase emerging examples to help make these concepts concrete. We'll hopefully have some space for reflection and exchange through polls and Q&A to understand where the charter signatories are currently standing on this, what challenges you're facing. And lastly, because the charter is about collective ambition and action, we're hoping that the insights from today's exchange will also feed into the ongoing discussions that the Charter Secretariat facilitates between signatories and our government and donor supporters on how to better support organizations in scaling up this work, including through diversified and sustainable funding streams. But before we jump in, we wanted to get a sense of where this group of participants are in their learning and experience in utilizing alternative finance. So using the QR code on the screen or by visiting menti.com and entering the code that you see on the top, 7713699, please answer the following question. How would you describe your organization's current experience with alternative or innovative financing for climate and environmental action? And I see some responses are coming in, which is great. I'm going to move to the next slide, but come back to this. So we'll see what you all respond in a moment. So please keep answering. So what do we mean by innovative and alternative finance? Traditional aid and grant-based funding alone are no longer sufficient to meet the growing humanitarian needs. To sustain and scale climate and environmental action, new pools of funding and financing approaches are urgently needed. There's also a growing recognition that some resources for humanitarian organizations must shift from short-term project grants towards longer-term, more flexible financing models. And this includes innovative instruments that can attract additional partners and capital into the sector. So when we talk about innovative or alternative finance in the humanitarian sector, we're referring to mechanisms that go beyond the traditional grant-based model that most of us are familiar with. The idea isn't to replace humanitarian funding or traditional grants, but to diversify and expand the financial toolbox. And this includes instruments such as carbon finance and insurance, and approaches like blended finance, where funds are tied to measurable impacts. And our speakers today will explain a bit more about some of these mechanisms and some examples of how they're being tested and used. Because engaging with these models requires a lot of learning about what they are, who and where they are most relevant, how we can use them effectively and in values aligned ways. Learning about how it's being done is a starting point. And the good news is there's a real growing body of knowledge and resources to draw from on this, such as the report I've flagged on the screen here, which you can access through the QR code. Additionally, the Red Cross Red Crescent's HIF Hub has compiled some resources and curated some courses on how to learn about innovative finance and where to start. I know that some of the HIF Hub colleagues are on the call, so they'll drop some links into the chat, and you should absolutely check out some of these resources after the session. And with that, if others on the call have resources they found useful or case studies from their own work, please do share in the chat. I'll come back to that also in a second. But first, back to who's in the room. What do we see here? There's a good chunk of people here that are really in the early stages. Either you haven't explored it yet, or you're in the stage of exploring options or partnerships. So for those that are new to this or just getting started, that's great. We're super happy to have you, and we hope this session's informative. Later, we'll come back to you to ask more about what you might want to learn on this topic. And for those with experience, the few of you here I see that are piloting or have even established some partnerships or mechanisms on this topic, we'd also love to hear from you. So feel free to share in the chat, as I mentioned. And we invite you also to fill in a very short form that Nishani will drop in the chat as well. We really hope to capture a bit more about the diverse experiences our sector has in implementing innovative finance in humanitarian settings on climate and environmental action, with the hope that we can have future opportunities for peer learning and exchange. But first, let's talk about today's session. We've got a diverse collection of speakers who bring really different perspectives to the discussion, from financing mechanisms to operational realities. And we invite you to listen and question, share your experiences and ideas throughout the chat. And with that, I'll hand the floor over to Carolina Wilberg, working on climate and environment at the European Commission's Department for Humanitarian Aid, who will be facilitating our panel session today. So over to you, Carolina.
Thank you so much, Natasha, for the introduction and for the opportunity. It's really a pleasure to have co-organized this webinar with the Climate Charter Secretariat. And I will be guiding you through the various presentations that our distinguished speakers will share with you today. And before we start, as you listen to the presentations, I would like to encourage you to post questions in the chat. And also, as Natasha mentioned, contribute with your own experiences, especially those who have already been exploring these mechanisms. And if you have questions for a specific speaker, please indicate in the chat who it's for, so it's a bit easier to guide. So first up, it's my pleasure to introduce you to Harpinder Collicott, who's the director at Forethought Social Ventures and also the director of innovations and partnerships at the Atlantic Institute. We're very, very happy to have you. Harpinder, you have been working on mapping some of the alternative funding mechanisms out there. Could you give us an overview of the landscape of the different mechanisms? What type of programs do these mechanisms fund? And also, if you could share some of the pros and cons for accessing these funds for organizations. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Carolina. I've actually got a PowerPoint. Thank you so much for sharing that. I'm just going to provide a bit of context before I jump straight in to looking at what the landscape looks like. And the first thing I want to say is that there is a lot of different language, technical language, but also language that is used interchangeably in this space as well. So there are certain things that I will describe in a particular way that may be described by others in a slightly different terminology as well. So I just want to put that out there first and foremost. And then I wanted to start off with sort of why this landscape really matters and why it matters now. And I know the introduction has covered some of that with regards to the fact that the development finance landscape is shifting, and it's shifting really fast. And that traditional donor income streams, particularly the pressure that's on ODA, so overseas development assistance, which is largely where that grant funding comes from, is making organizations look in different directions, but also public fundraising in the countries where a lot of international organizations are based is not stable. It is declining. It's under strain in many places. And so organizations are looking in different directions. But not just that, I think this is part of a natural evolution as we do humanitarian response development and now climate response and building climate resilience, is that fundamentally we need an ecosystem of capital that is going to be able to be utilized and reach targeted communities and achieve the results that it is best suited to achieve as well. And so grants aren't always automatically the best financing mechanism to be useful and used in all contexts as well. So there are a number of new forms of capital that are emerging, but there are also a number of new actors or actors that have traditionally been in this space, but are actually gaining greater awareness as well. So we can talk about DFIs, that's a conversation, development finance institutes, that are discussed all the time. Blended finance is a very common term that's used. Climate mechanism, philanthropic investors, measurable social and environmental outcomes. The terminology and the different mechanisms are broad and substantive as well. And then I think we've also got to look at what's the role of INGOs as well, and that is also changing. Humanitarian actors in regards to what they do and how they're doing is also changing. And the language is moving away from grants and aid towards investment, but also implementers are very much those who are on the ground. And we're talking more about co-investors, partners, how we deliver impact at scale. And I think that all feeds into this rather important conversation. But before I begin, I also wanted to just give you a little bit of a sense of the scale of what we're talking about here as well, and how significant that change has been in the data around actually financing the numbers. What are we talking about? So development finance institutions, their portfolios have tripled since 2000, and that's quite significant, tripled. They're now exceeding 100 billion US dollars, right? So these institutions are holding substantial funds. Blended finance is also on the increase. It's not as big as it was hoped it would be back in 2015 when we really had the billions to trillions narrative emerge from the Addis Financing Summit. But it's at, the last estimation said that it was at 200 billion, which has been the growth that it's seen since 2012. So since 2012, its blended finance is contributing around 200 billion, according to the latest data. Green bond issuance is also surpassing 2.5 trillion had done by 2023. So there's substantial growth. And these instruments are no longer niche instruments. They are shaping the way climate resilience and sustainable development is financed. And they are also, their risk appetite is also increasing. So they're more confident in highly volatile, vulnerable locations as well. And so that is demonstrating that push to make sure that they are reaching those communities who are at the face of climate change and seeing the impacts on a daily basis. So if we move to my first slide with that rather long introduction, I wanted to just share this map with you today and give you a sense of some of these different mechanisms, what they are, and how they can be utilised as well. And I know a number of the presentations that will follow mine will talk in much more detail. They'll bring those examples to life that I'm going to talk through a little here. So as you can see, and also one other thing, there is significant overlap between some of these mechanisms as well. Many of them, most of them, are fundamentally trying to leverage in new funding, particularly from private institutions. And so there is a big focus around how do you build an ecosystem of diverse actors who are bringing in different types of finance to create new funds. So there is a lot of overlap too here. So I just want to be able to sort of say that before I begin. So firstly, outcome-based finance. Now this is where funders pay for results, and a lot of the structure of the outcome-based finance initiatives are also the funding comes in after the results have been achieved as well. And I think that's a really important difference that people need to recognize. That often we say, oh, we've always been focused on outcomes, but in reality, the focus now becomes much more data-driven, and results and payments will only be released once all stakeholders are convinced that those outcomes have been delivered, and then the money will flow. So impact bonds, outcome funds like the Education Outcome Fund or health bonds in India fall into this category. And often the role of the INGO is much more of a stakeholder middleman that is building that ecosystem of multi-stakeholder partners, and the implementing partners on the ground are very much local organisations who are doing that delivery. Often the INGO is bringing in the skills of data collection. It has very solid M&E systems in place, because so much of the way that these outcome funds are structured really is very data driven. So the results have to be aligning with good data collection methods and being able to demonstrate that certain milestones are being met. A good example is also the Adaptation Fund for Climate Innovation Accelerator, which is led by WFP. It's running between 2024 and 2029. It has a number of calls for particular regions where they're actually bringing in projects. It's focused on enhancing climate adaptation and resilience with clearly a focus on food security, hence why it's with WFP. And it's also trying to build in and bring in innovative financing and venture launch pads as a way to ensure that there is non-grant type of capital being brought into social impact projects. Then blended, and we hear a lot about blended finance. Fundamentally, blended finance is focused on attracting private funding by de-risking that private investment. The bottom line is that where there's a blended project, it has to be able to generate profit for the private investors. So there has to be a business model or a revenue stream attached to a blended finance type of program, simply because that's why the private investors are coming in, and the role of the public or the philanthropic grants are often to de-risk, to take or guarantee some of those failure risks, to be able to then actually lower the risk for the private capital to come in. And again, there's a number of examples here, but one of the things that I would say is that a lot of the blended up until more recently, has blended finance projects have tended to go towards infrastructure projects, energy projects. So there is a lot of good examples of renewable energy or clean power, water and sanitation infrastructure projects as well, and also carbon funds, which sequester carbon and provide income for locals. Again, the fundamental element that has to be there is that there is a business model at its core, which allows there to be some form of return on capital for the private investor. So that's the nature of the funding model that they are structured on. Then we've got disaster risk finance, which I know Mahir will talk. Yeah.
I'm so sorry. We might have to speed up a tiny bit just to flag on time. Thank you so much.
Oh, okay. I will move very fast. Okay, so Mahir's going to talk about disaster risk finance, and I will leave that for him to give some more examples on. But again, the difference here is that, again, we know that the majority of the climate crises are predictable, and so it's shifting from humanitarian appeals post-crisis to pre and early response. So again, many different examples here. Start Network, I think, is a really good early adopter and has produced a lot of great results. Carbon and climate finance I won't talk about right now because I know Care will talk through and do a case study on that. And then we've got impact investment, and again, guarantees as well. But with impact investing, I think the difference here is that often investors are providing repayable finance to social enterprises backed by partial guarantees from donors. And that repayable element is often it's a social good type of repayment. So it's lower than what would be for commercial mechanisms as well. Okay, so if we just jump into the next slide, I'm going to just run through some of the key opportunities here and why they should be considered. I did want to talk a little bit more about what this means for INGOs, but we can leave that to a side. The important thing, I think, with regards to the pros are that ultimately this is about diversifying the model, but it's also about where the financing space is moving to. Them ultimately, more and more capital is being mobilized for these sorts of projects, and these projects have the ability to be at scale. They are diversifying that risk portfolio as well, with the number of partners coming in, and they're very much focused on building sustainability in the funding stream. So it's not a grant-based model of providing charity, but it's about investing in the resilience for the future as well. So here are some of the sort of the key things that I've highlighted with regards to the opportunities. And a key part of that is unlocking scale, because the size of funding for many of these projects are big. The fact that INGOs are able to work across multi-countries and are able to, they come with the links and the relationships on the ground, that is a unique opportunity that INGOs can bring to many of those who are putting funds together in this space and would not have that relationship and that learning from the ground. Strong data and data systems and monitoring impact is another key area that INGOs, I think, will bring to be able to bring to these projects as well. Just want to very quickly comment, sorry, I'm rushing through this, so I apologise. Just want to comment on the cons, some of the challenges that we're also likely to face. And I think these are quite important to just focus on a little, because fundamentally, we'd have to be building projects that are significantly different to the way that we've developed grant funding in the past, grant-funded projects. So there are different legal and financial intricacies in the shape and structure of many of these different funds, and therefore they require new technical skills and also different risk frameworks as well. So there's complexity in the model. And also multi-stakeholders who are building these models. So there is obviously the shift with regards to culture. Language is big, and this comes up over and over again, where we are often struggling to understand each other, and there is this wider need for translators to work between the organizations to help bring everybody to the table confidently as well. And then there's financial exposure. As I mentioned, many of these models also are payment by results approach. And so there is a requirement for organizations to be able to operate and deliver programs before the funding comes in. And also then sustaining some of that funding. So if there are systems where there's a premium payment upfront, how does that become sustainable over the long term? And that is something to consider as well. Partnerships dynamics are also very, very critical. And I think the fact that everybody's perception of risk is different, but also the incentives for being at the table are different. While we're used to working for not-for-profit, many actors will be coming in to see return on capital as well and be judging success differently. And the last thing I'd just say on way forward is that when I'm working with organizations, I always advise and start small, test, learn, build internal literacy before scaling. That's fundamental. And I think one of the big things that's important for a community like this is to build a community of practice where we are actually benefiting from each other's learnings beyond just case studies, to really build the space where we can actually assess what worked well, what didn't work well, what are the skills that we need to improve on, so that we're actually able to share that risk and also support the sector as a whole to move towards what will fundamentally be quite challenging and very different types of ways of working to leverage these new types of financing mechanisms. I'll stop there, Carolina.
Thank you so much. This really laid the ground perfectly for our next speakers to go a bit deeper on their individual experiences with all the different alternative financing mechanisms. But before going to me here, just since you will not be part of the Q&A, unfortunately, just wanted to pull out one question that the audience had for you. So, how would an NGO working with a not-for-profit purpose and therefore, with projects not really working around traditional business models, let's say, access these forms of funding opportunities without changing its mission and constitutive organizational model?
Good question. Very good question. I think there are many of these different types of funds which won't be about changing your business model, right? So social impact investing, it is not necessarily about changing our business model. It's just the way that the investor is wanting to see results and benefit. Same with being a partner on a bigger outcome-based fund as well. So there doesn't necessarily need to be that return on investment that we need to see, but other partners will have other key priorities. At the end of the day, most of these types of funds are still very much focused on social change, transformative change, and building resilience at that community level. So that mission alignment is definitely there, but what each partner might see on a return is different. Many different organizations have set up alternative bodies which are slightly outside of certain countries' charitable laws that mean that they can see a return on investment for a provider. So there are different models that different charities are trying where they will set them up outside of their own charity and have a governance structure that links them together to be able to actually benefit from or be able to provide funds back so for social impact investors to be able to provide them a return on their capital, which obviously from a charitable perspective becomes it's not possible according to the business model. And so there are different ways that organizations have looked at setting up which can overcome some of these barriers. But I think the first thing to do is to actually understand which ones do you want to try, which ones are likely to be the type of mechanism where you'll dip your toe in, and does it require a change in the way you're operating, or is it much more about skills, capacity, expertise that need to be adjusted and transitioned rather than actually the business model? Because the business models are flexible. And most charities also have shops, they have revenue streams, they make profit in different ways. So I think that most charities are already operating as businesses in many ways. And therefore they can find structural ways to be able to partner very confidently.
Great. Thank you so much for that great answer. Hope that was helpful to the audience as well. And so now we'll move to the case studies, and we'll start with Mihir Bhatt, who's the director at the All India Disaster Mitigation Institute, also known as AIDMI. So Mihir, could you tell us how AIDMI is leveraging risk insurance and microfinancing at the local national level in India to support small businesses in preparing and anticipating the impacts of extreme heat? And what are the steps that AIDMI has taken to raise these funds? We would also like to know whether this type of financing is scalable and sustainable in your view, and if so, what are the modalities and arrangements available to others? Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Carolina. And I'm so glad this is a follow-up to the Brussels initiative that was taken to see the financing of these kind of initiatives. I work with All India Disaster Mitigation Institute, and it's an action learning organization. So we actually do the pilots and demonstration projects, and we also do and from that we draw research and learning and others, and vice versa. This is case from India, with small businesses who are often neglected, and in urban areas. So 11 urban areas in India. And what we are doing is basically leveraging risk insurance and microfinance together as a twin strategy to help small businesses in India prepare for and anticipate the impact of extreme heat. We've taken up extreme events, and within that heat to do that, not because others events are not important, but extreme heat is something which is inescapable for anybody, anywhere in India, globally. So extreme heat. Through what is called Afat Bima, or micro insurance for disaster insurance, AIDMI pilots parametric insurance products, but also in the past, in 2002, after the Gujarat earthquake onwards, have a disaster insurance where the life was covered, where the livelihood is covered, the stock in trade is covered, the shelter is covered, and the implements or means of production, such as hand cart or hand puller, are also covered. And that has been done at a small scale, but consistently after the earthquake, after the tsunami, after floods, after another floods, after heavy cyclone. So since 2002, except the 2 COVID years, where it was very difficult to go to the communities and collect premium or pay the loss that they had actually suffered. AIDMI pilots these so that payouts reach small vendors, for example, and enterprises quickly when extreme heat disrupts their work and also their health. And for them, their health is their asset as well. At the same time, AIDMI mobilizes microfinance and revolving funds, including cash transfer, through self-help groups, local cooperatives, if they exist in that particular city, vendor association, if they exist, and enable businesses to invest in anticipatory measures. So we look at the last 2 years of loss and damage suffered by the small businesses in 2002, 2003. In 2004, they made a list of that, monetized it. What did it cost them? And then what is the minimum amount that they will need to take anticipatory action? 2,000 rupees, 5,000 rupees, depending upon that. And then that money was made available, through which they took the anticipatory action. And we were very happy to see, we have not finished the entire impact study yet, but the initial focus groups saw that the loss of livelihood, which used to be roughly 23% across the group, had come down because of the financing to 13%. So 10% difference with a very small local input of finance. And the impact on their health, because of extreme heat, they will not go to work, they will be feeling unwell, go to doctor, pay the clinic. So those kind of impact from 18% came down to 8%, again 10%. So that's the impact that has been achieved against extreme heat. At the national level, AIDMI is raising funds by blending support from philanthropy, CSR contributions, that is corporate social responsibility from large corporations, and municipal partnerships to subsidize premiums and seed preparedness funds while working with insurers to build reinsurance backing. So this is all work in progress. This layered approach reduces upfront costs for business owners, builds local ownership, and creates a sustainable pathway for scaling extreme heat protections across Indian cities. We've just finished 2025 summer. We are evaluating and planning for 26 summer. It's going to be equally bad, if not more. So that's where we are right now as far as our initiative is covered. We are also, what are the steps AIDMI has taken to raise these funds? That was your question, Carolina, second one. And we've taken several steps. One is the blended finance approach. Second, partnership with insurance and possibly reinsurers. Also, we looked at CSR and municipal engagements, leveraging local institutions, and of course, international donors and advocacy organizations. And that's, I can talk about that in detail subsequently in the question, but so those 5 approaches we have taken. There is no one single approach that if you don't have this, you have that. But if you don't have this, these and these and these and these are the 4, 5, 6 efforts you make, and 1 or 2 or 3 of them actually work out. So that's the approach that we are taking. Again, to repeat, the blended finance approach, partnership with insurance people, then with the CSR and municipal engagement, and leveraging local institutions and international donors. I must underline here that the contribution of the affected population by extreme heat, in our case, small businesses, is very crucial, and that's the first step. Even before the money comes for the project, they are able to put in upfront their contribution in terms of savings, their contribution in terms of premium, their contribution in terms of getting the project going. So willingness to pay is extremely high among them, and that is something that we find very useful. The last question you had was that, is this form of financing scalable and sustainable? And of course, we are just working on that, so we will see what actually happens. But what we are doing right now for scalability, 3 items. One is that the model can expand to different Indian cities. It has from 1 Indian city to 11 cities. So obviously, it is possible to repeat it or replicate it. And it can be standardized parametric trigger, that's one. But it could be specific, city-specific, location-specific, occupation-specific parametric trigger as well. That needs to be worked out. Second, it is delivered through existing local networks. So this idea of always organizing new delivery distribution is something we should resist and see what already exists as a municipal corporation, as a local NGO, as a local trade group, as a local association, and try to use that. And third, for scalability, is the design is modular, meaning different components, microinsurance, preparedness loans, or contingency funds, cash transfer, can be applied depending upon the local needs. So idea that the finance is very pure and it's either blended finance or it's a loan or this or that in the hands of the poor people, affected people, all those categories merge into one. And once they have the flexible finance, they use it to the best of the purpose, and we need to be ready for that. And last is the sustainability questions, and I'll stop after that. The premium sharing model is something which seems to be very sustainable, where small business contributors with modest premium often co-finance by corporate social responsibility or the municipal funds, either in terms of actual funds, or it may be also in terms of goods, services, municipal offerings. To give you an example, we are working with transportation workers in our city, and we offered to make sure that the drinking water supply, cool drinking water supply during the last summer was there with the drivers and conductors, while the cool water centers were offered by the municipal corporation. So it could be in-kind contribution by municipal corporations as well. The third is the community ownership, that all this is, if it comes from outside and we start from where we are, I don't know whether it will work, it will not work, but definitely if it starts from where they are, and that is their willingness to pay, the amount that is possible for them to pay for our premium. If we start from there, we are very likely to succeed. And as we've seen that last 3 years, that has happened. The revolving preparedness loans is another idea where it can be made sustainable, and we are actively working to have a fund where a loan can be prepared, can be revolved for 2 to 3 years, and make sure that that puts in the cash need that these people have. And last is the trust through quick payouts. Payout, immediate, timely, appropriate is very important if the things have to be sustained. And that's the reason why quite a few of the public finance or things we don't have any, they don't sort of last very long. Recently, Government of India has various schemes and programs to address some of these issues, and they are working. And our effort has been that how can what we have done is actually linking up the poor people, affected people, extreme heat affected small businesses with the existing large government programs and some of the private sector initiatives. So in short, the financing model is scalable because it can be replicated across different geographies and different occupational groups, and it's sustainable because the costs gradually shift to businesses while maintaining affordability with community structures and revolving funds ensuring continuity. Thank you, Carolina.
Thank you so much, Mihir. Thank you for sharing these concrete examples of how insurance and microfinancing can help supplement the funding for disaster preparedness and response. And it would be great to read that impact study when it's available. So next up, we have Joseph Fisher, who's a carbon finance specialist at the CARE Climate Justice Center. And he will help us dive into the world of carbon credits. So Joseph, CARE International is already working on carbon credits. So if you could share some examples of how they work. And also you have developed, CARE has developed some minimum standards on working on carbon credits. So what should organizations take into consideration when exploring such projects and opportunities? Just a kind reminder about the time, so we have time for Q&A as well to the other speakers as well. Thank you so much. Over to you, Joseph.
Thank you very much, Carolina. So I'm going to start off with a quick explainer on carbon finance and carbon credits, especially for anyone on the call who's newer to the topic. Then I'll share a little bit more around CARE's own experience working on carbon credit projects. So to start out, what is carbon finance? Carbon finance is a market-based approach to funding climate-positive projects, where project revenues are generated through the issuance and sale of carbon credits. A carbon credit is a tradable certificate that represents 1 ton of carbon dioxide or carbon dioxide equivalent that is avoided, reduced, or removed from the atmosphere. To break that down, avoidance credits are generated by projects that prevent emissions from being released. So a classic example here would be a avoided deforestation project, so protecting standing forests and ensuring that that carbon remains locked away in the ecosystem, preventing it from being emitted in the first place through deforestation. The second, reduction credits come from activities that make existing processes more efficient. So a great example here is the issuance or distribution of improved cook stoves, which burn less biomass than an open fire and therefore emit less CO2. And finally, removal credits, which are earned through a project that actively removes or sequesters carbon dioxide or equivalent GHG gases from the atmosphere. So this could be a nature-based project like planting and growing trees, or it could be a technology-based solution like direct air carbon capture. So with that in mind, let's look at how you'd actually go about creating a carbon credit. So imagine you've got an eligible project. What are the steps that you have to go through in order to unlock that finance? And so we've got a kind of simplified diagram of the process here on the slide. It's several steps that you go through and different layers of scrutiny to ensure that credit is high integrity. So you start off with a design phase, and at this phase, the project would be open for a public comment period. And then you go through various stages of validation and verification with independent third-party auditing, which offers another layer of checks on the credibility of those claims. And all these steps are overseen by carbon standards. So we've got two examples here, Gold Standard and Vera, which are the two leading standards by market share. But as well as setting the rules and requirements, these carbon standards are also responsible for managing public registries. So anyone can go online, look at a register of projects and see what credits they're issuing, in which regions, for what project types. And the idea here is to track the issuance, transfer and retirement of credits to maintain transparency and prevent double counting. So that covers the basics, and now we can look at some real life examples of projects that CARE's been involved in. So next slide, please. So we've selected two projects to show today. So they nicely demonstrate different types of projects. So one is a technology-based solution, the other is a nature-based solution, and one is avoidance project, or a reduction project, sorry, and the other is a removal project. So the first is a project called Bachat, which CARE has co-implemented with the Fair Climate Fund. This project took place in Odisha state in India, and it involved the distribution of cook stoves to 14,000 households. So this project has helped by reducing the amount of firewood burned in households. It's delivered significant climate mitigation benefits, alongside other benefits like improved indoor air quality, which has positive impact on household health. This project has already successfully generated credits which are available under the gold standard. The second example is an ongoing initiative called Restore Africa. So this is a project implemented by CARE Malawi and CARE Uganda, and this project is focused on ecosystem restoration through assisted natural regeneration and direct tree planting. This is an earlier stage project. It's still in implementation phase, but we expect it to begin generating credits under the gold standard in the coming years. So to move on to the next part of your question, which is really around exploring kind of specific opportunities and the different considerations that organizations should take, and particularly CARE's minimum standards that we've put together based on our early project experiences. So CARE has used these experiences and learnings to set 10 minimum standards, which we now aim to integrate into every new project we explore. These standards are being developed fairly early on in CARE's journey, so we expect them to evolve over time as the sector matures and best practices continue to emerge. But broadly, the current standards are grouped under three core pillars, being social integrity, real climate impact, and good governance. So if we start with social integrity, this is where CARE places a lot of emphasis. This is unsurprising given the nature of our organisation. But we expect all projects to be inclusive right from the design phase, so incorporating local knowledge in design phase, making sure that community priorities are well understood and integrated into that design, and making a genuine effort to understand the needs of different groups, especially those from most vulnerable groups. So a key element here is free-formed consent, or FPIC. We don't see FPIC as a one-off requirement carried out at the start of the project, but more as a continuous process. So regular check-ins with communities to make sure they're kept updated on project progress, and regular check-ins to ensure that that consent is ongoing and they remain supportive of the project. And of course, another key focus here is around gender. It's a central focus across all of CARE's work. So ensuring that in design and implementation of these projects, we're including and recognising the voices of women and girls, and also actively promoting economic opportunities for them. The second pillar is around real climate impact. If you're familiar with the carbon markets and you know the core carbon principles issued by the Integrity Council for the voluntary carbon market, you'll see quite a lot of overlap here. So here we really want to be sure that any carbon claims made through CARE supported projects are additional. So that means that any carbon benefit that we're claiming wouldn't have happened without the incentive provided by carbon finance. They're conservatively accounted for using solid scientific methods. They're long-lived, so this isn't just about a short-term intervention, but about ensuring that the impacts are long-lived. And finally, that they're uniquely claimed to avoid the risk of any double counting. And the final pillar is governance. So here we're really focused on project transparency, particularly when it comes to the flow of funds, the distribution of benefits. So where's that money going from the carbon revenues? How are benefits shared with communities? And how are decisions made around the use of those carbon revenues? So at CARE, we expect that any funds from carbon revenues are restricted, and they can only be used to scale the project or reinvested or redistributed back into the communities that are directly involved in the project. And we also emphasize civil society engagement here. So making sure that projects are always held to the highest standards, to make sure that together with peers that we continue to challenge each of these projects and make sure that we're doing, as good as we can in this space. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joseph, for guiding us through that. That was really, really helpful. And I think it also showed everyone really the added value of humanitarian organizations working on this, because especially of these minimum standards that you mentioned, and especially the social integrity and good governance, which, right, have, I think, maybe led to some questioning of these schemes. So it's really important that you have this oversight. So that's great. And we will look at the potential risks in the Q&A, as well as some other questions from the audience. So now I would like to invite Linda Wamune, who's the Program Director at Energy Peace Partners. And Linda will explain to us a different but related form of credits, namely Peace Renewable Energy Credits, and their potential for humanitarian organizations. So Linda, what are Peace Renewable Energy Credits, or PRECs for short, and how can humanitarian actors leverage them for the solarization of their operations? And could you share some examples? And also, how does Energy Peace Partners facilitate these connections, and how do you support partners in benefiting from PRECs? Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. And my name is Linda, and I'll be taking you through just a couple of slides to give you a little background about what we do, who we are, and how Peace Renewable Energy Credits can support projects. About Energy Peace Partners, we are a nonprofit. We have offices both in the US, on the West Coast, San Francisco, and Nairobi. Our mission is to leverage climate solutions and innovative finance to promote peace in some of the world's most fragile regions. And so we have this specific focus on fragile and conflict-affected states. And wanting to promote this innovative instrument that I'll be talking about, we have fashioned ourselves and play a couple of roles, including market building, policy advocacy, and the actual issuance of the certificates, because we are recognized by the standards body that manages this. And before I go into the detail of the PRECs, just why we do that is because of the limited investment in renewable energy and financial flows. If you look globally at financial flows that go to fragile countries, on a global scale, that is less than 4%. And so, if we look at the number of people that are still unelectrified, and if we don't do anything to help support and de-risk project investment in these fragile countries, then there's the risk that they will keep being left behind, because then every investor that is looking at financing projects often views them as risky, and therefore wanting to minimize their risk. The easiest thing is to avoid supporting and providing money for such kinds of projects. And so what we do is we issue what are called international renewable energy certificates. And these are a type of environmental attribute, which are like the little known sibling to carbon credits. So both of which are environmental attributes, carbon financing instruments, but the International Renewable Energy Credit or certificate has a specific application, and this only applies to electrification projects that are developed with renewable resources. So, for example, we can issue, in short, they're called RECs. So we can issue RECs from solar electrification projects, hydro or wind where applicable, a majority of the work that we do is heavily skewed towards solar electrification projects, because decentralized energy is what is currently being developed in many locations across the continent. And so with this instrument that is used in locations where there are no local mechanisms, in more developed countries, they have their own certificate schemes. So if you look at Europe, for example, they're called guarantees of origin, and they're legally recognized instruments that corporates can use to account for their avoided emissions from their electricity use. And in the US, different states have mechanism schemes. When you come to emerging markets such as Africa and some of those in Southeast Asia, we don't have any like country level schemes. And so we tend by default to rely on the IREC certificate scheme. And this scheme is recognized by various consumer claim standards, including the Greenhouse Gas Protocol, RE 100, and this is a group of large corporates that have made commitments to transition to using renewable energy, 100% renewable energy use. When it comes to greenhouse gas accounting, there are different types of emissions and different instruments that are recognized, which you can use to account. And so RECs specifically are used in accounting for what are called Scope 2 emissions. And these are emissions that are associated with electricity use for different organizations. So you can find, for example, a company is they have some industrial electricity application somewhere, and they are consuming electricity from, could be a dirty grid, and yet they have no way of installing renewable energy systems in their locations. And so what they do is buy these kinds of certificates to be able to make the claims of the use of renewable energy. And so what specifically PRECs are a label. So the PREC, the P stands for peace. And so a peace renewable energy credit is a label on top of that standard international renewable energy credit, which we use to signify the social and economic benefits for investing in renewable energy projects from these specific locations that we target, the fragile countries. And in terms of measurement, one certificate is the equivalent of 1 megawatt hour of electricity that is generated from a renewable source. And so with that, if you have a mini grid that's 100 kilowatt or whatever, you can do the actual measurement, because there are electricity meters that are installed at each generating site. And so the unit of measure is very straightforward. We rely on the meter readings that are, and verify to confirm that those readings are accurate. And so with every megawatt hour of electricity that is generated, a certificate can be issued. And there's a system, a registry that is globally managed. And the risk of, double issuance or accounting is minimized. Once you issue a renewable energy certificate from that project, then you cannot also go ahead and issue a carbon credit at the same time from the same. So these are, complementary instruments, and you do one or the other. It just so happens that for electrification, the simpler one and more straightforward application is RECs. And companies purchase this, and they use them to meet the environmental and social goals. Project developers benefit from receiving the monies that they make from the sales of these credits. And the unique thing about PRECs is that because of the label that we've given it and recognizing the social and economic co-benefits, the certificates sell for a premium. And if on average, market and supply forces usually dictate the prices of, carbon credits or even RECs, you might find a standard IREC may go for something like about $3 per megawatt hour. But because our specific mandate is to try and direct as much money as we can to projects, so we charge a premium price on PRECs. And on average, we have been able to facilitate transactions, in the range of up to about $50 per certificate. In terms of how we are supporting the market, because certificates can only be issued after the generation, we realize that there's a gap which most developers, project developers face, the financing gap. They're struggling to raise financing to build out new projects, and yet regs can only be issued after generation. So that means can only issued on projects that have been built. So what we're doing to counter that challenge is we are in the process of setting up a facility that will be known as a PREC aggregation facility, which will be it's actually delayed. We will be launching at the beginning of 2026. And what this is a financing facility that will be able to provide up to 10% of construction capex for new projects, and enter into long-term contracting and pay developers upfront for future delivery of these credits up to a 10-year period. So what that happens is, we've taken on a very huge risk where we are giving a developer money to go and build out the project in advance and giving you money for up to 10 years worth of generation. And once the facility is constructed, commissioned, and it is now generating electricity, that's when now they will start paying back, but pay back in form of the issuance of the PRECs, not in cash. And so we see this as a very important. Yeah. So we see this as an important way of de-risking projects and being able to attract other financing mechanisms that will be able to then form the full basket of capital that project developers are looking at when they're raising financing. In terms of some examples of where we have issued PRECs, and this, the first ones we did about 5 years ago, a private developer company known as Nuru. This is in the DRC. They're actually in Goma. It was a small facility, a 1.3 megawatt solar installation. And the money at the time, because they had already built out, so the PRECs that we issued were able to support financing for the construction of streetlights that were installed in a neighborhood. We've had a partnership with IOM, several transactions that they've raised money to electrify hospitals. For example, in Malakal, the Malakal Teaching Hospital was electrified using PREC revenues. They did that in Bor. And on an annual basis, they keep selling them to support other community initiatives. We've have many other examples, but those are just a few of them. Yeah, so thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Linda. And as you can see, colleagues, there's definitely huge potential for leveraging PRECs for the urgently needed solarization of humanitarian operations, actually, because this can not only help us cut costs in these difficult financial times, but also ensure more reliable energy access, especially in difficult to reach contexts. So as you can see, these are really credits that are tailored to the context that we work in. So thank you so much for that. And now, last but not least, I'm happy to introduce Nisreen Carmen Zarawi, who's L'Oréal Climate Emergency Fund Manager. So she will be speaking from the private sector perspective. And Nisreen, what is the focus of the L'Oréal Climate Emergency Fund for those who may not be familiar with it? And could you share some examples of projects and initiatives supported by the L'Oréal Climate Emergency Fund? Where are you filling the gap in terms of what you support? And finally, could you share how the fund sources projects? Because this is an important element, on your way of working. How do you find projects? And what does a good proposal consist of? And if I could just please ask to keep to time so that we have enough time for the Q&A. Thank you so much. Over to you, Nisreen.
Thank you so much, Carolina. Let me know if you can see my screen properly.
Yes.
Yeah, it's working. Okay, so we have 7 minutes. So I will just, first of all, would like to tell you that I'm, of course, delighted to be with you today to share this experience of the L'Oréal Climate Emergency Fund, which is actually a 15 million endowment fund created by L'Oréal in 2023. So you see that it's a very young philanthropic fund of general interest, which is completely and totally disconnected from L'Oréal business. So this is very important in the way we operate. Why this choice of creating this new vehicle, which is complementing also L'Oréal sustainability strategy, but also other L'Oréal, there is the L'Oréal Foundation dedicated to women and science, the Fund for Women, and the last one is this one. Why this choice? Of course, because of this context where we have this urgency to act, because as you all know, more than 55% of disasters are actually climate related, and we also notice in this context that these climate emergencies are really underfunded, specifically when it comes to prevention and anticipation. So, which represents something like less than 1% of the philanthropic funding. So that's why L'Oréal decided to create this fund to actually focus to focus on the most vulnerable communities and the one which has actually the less capacity to face. So we are not targeting countries, but really the communities where they are, who are the most exposed to climate disasters and with less capacities. To do that, our mission actually is relying on two types of actions. The first one is really preparedness, how we change actually people's behavior to better anticipate disaster management through risk prevention plans, etc., early warning systems. And the second type of activity is the response to the response when a disaster strikes by providing humanitarian aid to local communities. We do that actually through locally led organizations, but also international humanitarian NGOs, but also environmental institutes. And we try also, we will see through the last call of proposal, how we try to combine as well working with NGOs, but also startups to promote also innovation. So the idea, because of this specific positioning, is really to concentrate 70% of our budget to anticipation and prevention, not only through innovation, and try to identify innovation, and 30% to the humanitarian response. So where we are today, we have actually, again, we are in a learning phase created. So this fund has been created in mid-2023. So after 2 years of work, we actually have funded 17 projects in 21 countries, targeting more than 800,000 beneficiaries. And for the moment, and just to also respond to your question, Carolina, how do we source our project? The first phase were more reactive through our network. As soon as the climate fund has been created, NGOs came to us, and this is where we have really responded to disasters. So that's why today more than 65% of our funding went to humanitarian aid and response, and 35% has been dedicated to project of preparedness and anticipation. Maybe here I just would like to share with you the kind of project that we have supported so far. The first one is actually related to the contribution and the testimony of me here, actually, because we decided to, the first project actually we have, an NGO we have supported was Start Network, because of its innovative model in terms of finance and network, etc. And the second one was this one from the Global Resilience Partnership Organization, coming with Climate Resilience for All, and the Indian trade union called SIWA. They had this holistic project dedicated to innovative insurance mechanism to face extreme heat in India. So we were targeting here in the second year 50,000 women working in the informal sector outdoor around India. And the specificity of this project was really to combine cash transfer and parametric insurance to be able to support them to compensate the loss of revenue during the heat period. The second project I wanted to focus on is more related to climate and mental health, where we combine science and action with this idea of working with research institutes like the Columbia University, with SDI and very local NGO called Basic Needs. And this project came actually from the Youth Climate Network Action in Nairobi, with this willingness to work on the individual resilience and collective resilience of communities who are facing recurrent flooding in situation on existing already situation of extreme vulnerability. I can answer to question if you have about this project. Then to complement our action and to be able to reach this 70% in terms of budget dedicated to anticipation, we have launched a call for proposal to identify technologies supporting early warning systems. So after a long process of selection, we've been able actually to select 13 projects which are ready to be deployed and coming in several geographies, actually all around the world, and targeting diverse climate disasters. The idea really, by doing that, is really to catalyze innovation and stimulate innovation. Again, innovation can be technology, it can be financial innovation, can be social innovation to scale our impact. And the second part of our activity is also to try to also be more efficient in the way we provide emergency aid, by focusing on like 10 pre-vetted NGOs partners with whom we sign global agreements, so they can, with the funding we gave them, activate, depending on the disaster, the envelope we share with them. Through this work, we ambition as well to partner with the scientific organization and center based in London, to be able to assess actually and evaluate the project we are implementing, to be able at one stage to share actually the best practices and avoid duplication. So again, we've heard these words about the capacity to scale together, to replicate at scale, etc. And we think that scientific collaboration could also help provide and share the best practices and what works, what doesn't work, to avoid duplication of the work. I will stop here, conscious of the time, and let you take the lead, Carolina.
Thank you so much, Nisreen. It was really great to hear on what specific projects you are supporting and what you look for in your partnership. So hopefully this inspired others for possible future collaborations with L'Oréal Climate Emergency Fund. And with this, I'll pass over to Nishani for a very quick Q&A. Luckily, speakers have been very good at answering questions in the chat, so thank you so much for that. So over to Nishani to select some questions for our speakers.
Thank you. There's so many questions, and I'm super happy that everyone's answering them due to time restrictions. I think we have a few that we weren't able to tackle, and I think Mihir and Bin, I'm going to work with you for a bit on some of this. So Mihir, the first question to you would be, we heard a lot about the work you're doing on the ground, and sometimes on what, with local actors, how can they work on the ground? Do you have any suggestions on how other organizations who are national, local NGOs can leverage your experience? What sort of work can be done and on the ground that they also can use in their own context? If you can keep it short so that we can get on to the other questions as well. Thank you, Mihir.
Sure, I will. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, we can.
I think 5 ways we would be very happy to both share what we've done, but also be part of that somebody's doing. One is very much repeating or replicating such and similar pilots from extreme heat in other areas, geographic, that is urban and rural, as well as other cities and other districts of India, or maybe other parts of South Asia as well. Those sort of pilots and demonstration. We do it with their support. We jointly do it, whatever. But that's sort of one area where we think we could take this to other places, other organizations, other locations. The second thing is on policy. For example, insurance policy. No agency can deal it themselves directly and unilaterally. So we'll be very happy to work on policy level to make sure that we join forces to explain to national disaster authorities, national insurance authorities, to take up extreme heat, parametric, flood, any other disaster insurance as well as financing jointly. So that's another area. Third area is capacity. We have this work which has worked and worked well, I'm sure, and I know there are many others who've done work and that has worked well. So how do we use that to build capacity of other organizations, public, private, national authority, others, so that they can do this work on their own where they are working? The fourth is the work that we could do is jointly review, evaluate, reflect on the work that has already been done by others, and we'll be very happy to do that. It's not that easy to evaluate and reflect on the existing heat work, flood work, etc. So that's the fourth. And the fifth is the last one. And with academic institutions and universities or even other organizations, we'll be very happy to write up chapters or case studies for use for knowledge purpose, sort of co-create. So 5 ways we can we are actually prepared to work on that after January 1st. So we are just gearing up for these 5. And these 5 are not an offer. We already have demand for that. So we have clustered those demands into these 5 areas of working: policy, capacity, pilots, evaluations, and knowledge creation. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Mihir. And I'm going to turn to Bin now. Bin, we've been hearing quite a lot of questions, very technical questions to Joseph. So I'm going to ask you a little bit more on the lessons learned, which is important in humanitarian settings, including what are the potential risks in looking at carbon credits as alternative financing that CARE has from lessons. Over to you, Bin.
Yeah, well, thanks a lot, Ms. Shani. Carbon finance is newer, and it's even newer in humanitarian settings. So we cannot say that we already have a lot of lessons learned, but we anticipate some potential challenges and risk. The first one, especially in humanitarian settings, is everything related to governance. And then Carolina say from the beginning, where the money is coming from and where the money will be distributed to. In case of the humanitarian context, when you have a lot of displaced populations and host communities, the share between the interest from the carbon credits between the host community and displaced communities is an issue, especially when it comes to projects that relying on land, like agriculture, like reforestation. So, host community believe that it's their land, though, so they are entitled to receive this interest. Why it have to be shared with the refugees and the displaced people? So how to handle this kind of benefit sharing is a great issue, is because our target populations are including host and displaced people. So that definitely a huge risk, especially social tensions that we need to take into consideration. The second issue is time. For carbon credits to be generated, it takes years. It takes, for cooking stove, which is the easiest and the fastest unit, minimum 3 years to 5 years to set up a project. For others, like deforestation, you need 10, 15, 20 years. Humanitarian settings changing too quick. So this kind of timelines and this permanence of the settings that's not changed is very tricky for us to guarantee. Of course, we all would like our refugees come back home, but which also means that the 1,000 or the 10,000 cooking stove that was distributed will not be used. So how we can make sure this kind of risk for our investors. Another thing is related to the legal frameworks. The legal frameworks for the voluntary carbon markets in general is at very nascent stage everywhere. And then for countries where we have a huge humanitarian crisis, it's even less. So there is no regulations for us to navigating, and then it's even more difficult to work. Especially when it comes to land tenure. For example, for the carbon finance projects, you need to have very strong land tenure, land policies as a ground, but that is not always available. Another point that actually already mentioned by our participant here is upfront investment. One of our, I think the first speaker talking about pilot small, carbon finance, you cannot pilot small. You need to have a scale enough. Like the case of the project Bachat in India, we're talking about 14,000 households to be able to be viable, because the upfront investment is so costly that the time on the cost for registration, certification, auditing, it's so costly that you cannot really starting small. So upfront investment, transaction costs, and at the end of the day, it can be even more difficult in humanitarian setting when we do not have enough funding to support the basic needs. How can we put aside money for the upfront investment? So that is one of the potential challenges that we identified during the explorations of these possibilities.
Thanks so much, and very useful insights, I think, for everyone who's interested in maybe kickstarting some of these types of alternative financing, especially in humanitarian and conflict settings, right? I'm just going to turn quickly to a Menti, which Natasha will put up and also share. Please do check out the QR code and scan. We want to basically find out, what sort of help as organizations do you need to strengthen access to alternative financing for climate and environment action. And this is something we'll come back to in future webinars and events. You can share up to 3 responses, so please do share your input. There's also an other option. If there's something specific you'd like to support on, please let us know, and please share also in the chat. And if there's any support we can facilitate as a secretariat on the follow-up with donors, supporters as well. So please do share. This is important because we're collecting this information to support you further in the next rounds. So before we do a wrap up and final comments, I'd like quick rapid fire, maybe reflections from the speakers on, and I'm sorry we're not able to go to everybody for questions, there's so many. What do you think, especially for organizations who are funders? So for example, Nisreen, and even to you, Linda, what do you think as organizations, how do we need to be more prepared and to be really focused in terms of how we access this sort of alternative financing that's out there as humanitarian organizations? Over to you. Maybe Nisreen first and then Linda.
Sorry. So Nishani, the question is that how people can be ready to get the funding. That's the point.
Yeah. What can we do? Really focused. What can we be, targeting? How do we need to be really?
Yeah, I think again, this sentence came before in the discussion, is the capacity also to demonstrate the impact that we have. Because as a private philanthropy fund, we are driven by data, by KPIs, and unfortunately, this is maybe something that needs to be improved. And because we are all talking different languages, and we need to align, this is not always easy. But my job is also to make this connection between NGOs and the private. So we manage it, but in a sense, we need to have the same target in terms of impact, and the impact needs data. So our capacity to collect data is really key, I would say, and to have a long long-term vision and strategy to be able to grow. I mean, the message from our side was really, don't try to work with a lot of people, but target some and at early stage and grow with them. So I don't know if it can help, but this is actually our vision at L'Oréal.
No, definitely useful. Absolutely. Thank you so much. And Linda, any suggestions, advice for humanitarian actors on how we can access some of this funding that and financing that's out there that you're working on? Very focused.
I would first start by saying scale is needed. Because if you look at the unit of measure, if only one certificate is the equivalent of 1 megawatt hour, so ideally we're talking about, for you to benefit and for this to make sense, it has to be either you have a large portfolio or you built out big projects. To echo what Nisreen has said, data, because we rely on metering systems to verify generation. And now that we have technology, so incorporate technology in the systems that you're putting up, because we've moved away from, manual meter readings, which can be, fraudulent. And we do not want a case where, by bad luck, certificate is confirmed to not be accurate. So, being a claim system, integrity is key, and therefore we really have to be sure about the information and the data that we're getting. And partnerships are important. Why? Because, like I said, with the IREC framework, country itself has to be recognized within the IREC ecosystem. And sometimes you find and oftentimes, actually not sometimes, oftentimes in the countries that we are targeting, there's no way of issuing a certificate without that recognition within the IREC framework. And so we've relied on partners to help us extend this instrument in their countries through, them speaking with the governments to allow this, issuing letters of no objection. And so that's often the first, the starting point is, can the country commit and accept to use this standard for issuing IRECs. And so partnership is really a great way of getting us there.
Thanks. Those are excellent points to keep in mind. And I'm going now to last comments from Mihir and Joseph. And Bin, if we have time, is what can our traditional donors do? We saw quite a lot on risk sharing coming up. There's a lot of upfront money required for some of these alternative financing models to already kickstart. Any last points? First to Joseph, then to Mihir, and then to Bin.
Yeah, I think you've already started touching on it there in the question. I think there's so many kind of barriers very early stage in these projects, trying to fund those initial kind of feasibility studies and exploration that can be so hard when you're competing for the same dollars that are needed in critical humanitarian projects. So yeah, I think if donors are able to make available, even if it's just small amounts to support those early investigations, I think it's really impactful and catalytic work.
Perfect. Thank you. Mihir.
Yes. One is to provide first loss guarantee funds, if that's possible. And there are 2-3 other ways of doing it. We can discuss that maybe next webinar. Second is co-finance premium in early stages. And that also, there are 2-3 ways of doing it. And third is invest in data and public goods. That's very important, as well as the institution building, because if we don't have the strong institution at the local level, the project doesn't continue, especially the risk transfer, which is finance related. Fourth is back preparedness funds and revolving loans and cash transfer funds, if that are part of the blended finance. And fifth is to support capacity and partnership. And this is not something which can be undervalued, because they are extremely important for the sustainability of these projects. And sixth, and the last from my side, is incentivize scale through result-based financing. That, as L'Oréal Foundation has very clearly said, that if we don't have long-term vision with very short-term concrete results on the ground, we will not be able to achieve what we want to achieve. And that especially helps for alternative financing. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And Bin, one last in a quick.
Well, I think all has been said by my colleagues, especially me here. He have a long list. I think actually our institutional donors has already working on that. So I'm speaking to carbon finance capacity building the same, because actually NGOs, we are so new to this. So please also capacity building for NGOs, and also supporting. I know some of the donors having quite a lot of support related to institutional capacity building, but looking into very much on setting frameworks. I know donors that been having projects on supporting building the favorable, equitable environment for carbon finance. So I think that types of projects are very useful.
Perfect. Thank you. And just to inform those who are still around that we will be sharing more experiences like what CARE, like what All India Disaster Mitigation Institute and others have been doing. So please do share your own lessons learned and your experiences. And I'm going to hand over to Carolina for some final comments. Over to you, Carolina.
Thanks so much, Nishani, and thank you so much to all our distinguished speakers for the rich contributions. It was really, really a wide-ranging set of experiences and information that encompassed, you know, the spectrum of climate action, environmental action, climate change, adaptation, and also mitigation in humanitarian contexts, and how we can seek other sources of funding beyond the traditional kind of grant-based. So thank you so much for that. And in terms of follow-up, well, you've shared with us what your needs are, what kind of resources you would need and what kind of support. So definitely in cooperation with the Climate Charter Secretariat, which DG ECHO supports, will be following that up, as this is an important area of work. And from DG ECHO's side, I mean, this is also an interest for us. So we're having these conversations as well with our partners and looking at how we can also support been mentioned, the institutional capacity building. So this is definitely an important one. And, you know, we have funding streams for that kind of innovation and capacity building. So we'll be looking at that to try and get some support through that. So we want to, as you know, as a traditional donor, we nevertheless want to support our partners in accessing these alternative forms, because at the end of the day, we want to see the continuation of climate and environmental actions in the humanitarian context. So thank you so much. And this is just a continued conversation.
Thanks a lot. Thank you, everyone. Thanks to all the
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.